Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literary Love Book Club live show. I don't know why I am small. There we go. I don't know my screen, or I can't blame it on the screen. I did something really weird. So, thank you all for being here today to talk about John Keats' Ode to a Nightingale and Percy Bysshe Shelley's To a Skylark. I saw some of you just a little while ago on our very first virtual tea party. So thank you if you were able to join for that. If you are catching this on the replay, thank you for catching the replay. You can also catch a replay of our virtual tea party, which is going to become a seasonal event. More on that later. So let me check in on all the comments. I am so excited to talk to you all about these two poems today. So let's check out who's here. Hello again, my friend Swank. Lovely to see you again. Okay, I will be showing both of them on the screen if I and technology get along today, because we will be reading the poems before we talk about them. So no worries if you didn't get a chance to read the poems yet. Hi, Stina. Yeah, that's I put those links in my announcement video for the poetry, but you can find most of these poems that I will reference today too on the Poetry Foundation website. So that's one of my favorite sites to access poetry. So just a quick question before we launch into everything. As you can see down on the banner, I would like to know if you had a preference for either Keats' Ode to a Nightingale or Shelley's To a Skylark. So I'll let you all pick, put a preference down in the comments if you had a particular preference for one over the other. I really enjoy both of these poems, and I would say on the average, I typically prefer Keats over Shelley, although they are both among my favorite poets. But in this particular instance, I actually like To a Skylark maybe that much more than Ode to a Nightingale. But I do love both. So this is my first time to lead a book club for poetry. So we're kind of going to play it by ear and see how it goes. We'll tweak what needs to be tweaked for a typical analysis or discussion of a book that we've read. So bear with me as we all kind of, dip our toes into discussing poetry together. Okay, enjoyed the Keats more. I love to hear it. I love the diversity and the difference, between what we enjoy more. So for this particular venture, because we have two poems, I feel like it's going to be easier if I first go over the Romantic movement itself and then talk about both of the poets, and then we'll break down the poems individually. Hello, Crystal. I'm so happy to see you here. Love that you can make it today. Let us know if you had a preference for either poem, which one you enjoy more than the other, or if people didn't like any of them, let me know. So what we'll do is I will tweak these banners over here. Hi, Eleanor. I'm so glad you can make it. Thank you for being here. So while everybody's coming in, so I'm going to start, even before I do talk about the poets, since they are both romantic poets, I'm going to start off by, wait a minute, let me make this the ticker. That's what I said, I got to get into the element here to remember all of these little boxes to tick. Now this should be able to scroll across. There we go. So we'll talk about the literary and historical context first. Yay, I'm so happy. I do love them both, but I do prefer To a Skylark a little smidge more. So let's talk a little bit about the Romantic era. So when we talk about romantic, as far as this type of poetry, we don't mean like your rom-coms, not that kind of romance. So the Romantic era was a movement that was really a kind of pushback against the Age of Enlightenment. The Romantics also started this movement around the same time as the Industrial Revolution was picking up speed. So it is a pushback against that industrialization, a pushback against the machine, a pushback against the age of reason and enlightenment and strict structure. So the Age of Enlightenment really championed reason and logic over everything else. But the Romantics instead shifted a focus on their viewpoints to the mystery, the doubt, the speculation, the natural world, a focus on emotions and subjectivity instead of objectivity, and great imagination. So I will reference Taylor Swift a couple of times as she's related to these romantic poets we're talking about. So first of all, she does have a song called The New Romantics, and she has lines such as, we show off our scarlet letters, trust me, mine is better. And we'll see from some of these romantic poets, they definitely had their scarlet letters. They had their wild sides, and they wanted to go ahead and parade those in front of everybody. As such, they were very often, pretty much most of the time, sympathetic to radical revolutionary politics, and they had an anti-elitist worldview for the most part, although some of them, as they grew older, kind of shifted from that perspective. Percy Bysshe Shelley, one of the poets we're going to talk about today, he was married to Mary Shelley. It was quite a scandal. We don't really have time to go into all of that today, but I encourage you to look up the story of Percy Shelley and Mary Shelley and find out for yourself. But Shelley was often referred to as Mad Shelley because he wrote quite prolifically on his atheistic beliefs and views. As a matter of fact, some of his writings on atheism actually got him kicked out of Oxford University. So he was much more interested in more of an individualized spirituality versus a strict religious type of belief. He believed in connection to the natural world, as the Romantics did, and that embracing of emotion. So that's a little bit about our man Shelley. And now let's talk a bit about John Keats and his kind of stance as we're talking a bit about the literary and historical content. So let me shift my little note a bit to talk about Keats. I can talk about now, I guess we could switch, because even though we will kind of be still talking a bit about the literary and historical context, we will also really be talking now too about these bios. So I'm just going to keep the banner as author bios and not worry about changing it to poet bios, because you know what we're talking about, right? So let's get this one up. All right. So Keats is one of the most celebrated poets in the English language, and one of his most celebrated poems is the poem we're going to look at today, Ode to a Nightingale. It was written during a time in which he had this burst of creativity. During the spring of 1819, that's when he wrote other odes that are very famous, such as Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode on Melancholy. He is generally known as a member of the second generation Romantic poets, along with Percy Bysshe Shelley and Lord Byron. So Lord Byron is another very scarlet lettered Romantic poet. who was once classified by a woman he had a relationship. Lord Byron was known as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. He was the real playboy of the Romantic poets, although you could certainly argue that Percy Shelley was pretty much a playboy too. But back to our man Keats. So Keats was often downgraded as a poet during his time. He was looked down upon because he did not have the educational opportunities that some of the other Romantic poets did. He had a Cockney accent, which would often be the butt of jokes and subject him to ridicule because of class systems and because of, regional prejudice. So some things never change, unfortunately, right? So Keats, I read one of his poems in our little virtual tea party a while ago, La Belle Dame Sans Merci. So I recommend reading all of Keats and Shelley too. So now that I feel like we know a little bit about them, let's kind of get into the poems here. So I'll take this off. And I will also mention too that Keats did have a difficult life. His brother was he lost a brother to tuberculosis, and Keats himself would eventually succumb to tuberculosis. Percy Shelley actually wrote a poem titled Adonis, which was an elegy for John Keats, so memorialized him in that way. And I think they did meet a couple of times, although Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley spent a great deal of time together. Keats was not there during that infamous or famous summer, or winter. It was summer, but a winter situation when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. So definitely a lot going on back there in the behind the scenes with Percy Shelley. So let's go on now and talk about a Skylark, because I will ramble quite a bit about Mary and Percy, but that's a subject for another day. So I'm going to take this off here, this banner here, and then I'm going to go ahead and read to a Skylark, and I will be able to share my screen, but I don't know that you're going to be able to see me. You may just see the screen I share. So I want to make sure that you can hear me. So I'm going to test that out, and you can all let me know if you hear me while I screen share and we read the poem and then talk about it. Because I don't think you'll be able to see me. If you can't, that's fine. I just need to make sure that you can hear me. So you all let me know, and I will go ahead and share the screen for To a Skylark. Can you all hear me? Let me know. Then we'll go back and check the comment just to make sure that you can. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Crystal. So I wanted to make sure that you could hear me. So let me put that back up. And go back over there. So hold that thought. Okay, so here we go. And one of the things I do want to say, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds about, form and meter and that kind of thing, because I'm not teaching you a poetry class. We are having a discussion about the joys of poetry right now. But one of the things that I do want to mention is that often whenever people first start reading poems, they think that when you come to the end of a line that you're supposed to stop. But that's not the case unless there is some sort of punctuation. Like in this first line, you have an exclamation mark, which says, stop. That's the end of a complete thought. But in these last two lines where you have full heart and profuse strains, you don't want to stop there. So you're going to read it just as if you were reading it in prose, as far as, where to pause for commas or stop for punctuation marks. So don't stop when you get to the end of the line. So that's just a little quick note. All right, so now let's talk about our read to a skylark. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Higher still and higher from the earth thou springest like a cloud of fire. The blue deep thou wingest, and singing still dost soar, and soaring ever singest. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun, o'er which clouds are brightening, thou dost float and run, like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. The pale purple even melts around thy flight, like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill delight. Keen as are the arrows of that silver sphere, whose intense lamp narrows in the white dawn clear until we hardly see. We feel that it is there. All the earth and air with thy voice is loud, as when night is bare, from one lonely cloud the moon rains out her beams, and heaven is overflowed. What thou art we know not. What is most like thee? From rainbow clouds there flow not drops so bright to see, as from thy presence showers a rain of melody. Like a poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden, till the world is wrought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. Like a high-born maiden in a palace tower, soothing her love-laden soul in secret hour with music sweet as love, which overflows her bower. Like a glowworm golden in a dell of dew, scattering unbeholden its aerial hue among the flowers and grass, which screen it from the view. Like a rose embowered in its own green leaves, by warm winds deflowered, till the scent it gives makes faint with too much sweet those heavy winged thieves. Sound of vernal showers on the twinkling grass, rain awakened flowers, all that ever was joyous and clear and fresh, thy music doth surpass. Teach us, sprite or bird, what sweet thoughts are thine. I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine. Chorus hymnal or triumphal chant, matched with thine would be all but an empty vaunt, a thing wherein we feel there is some hidden want. What objects are the fountains of thy happy strain? What fields or waves or mountains? What shapes of sky or plain? What love of thine own kind? What ignorance of pain? With thy clear, keen joyance, languor cannot be. Shadow of annoyance never came near thee. Thou lovest, but ne'er knew love's sad satiety. Waking or asleep, thou of death must deem things more true and deep than we mortals dream. Or how could thy notes flow in such a crystal stream? We look before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Yet if we could scorn hate and pride and fear, if we were things born not to shed a tear, I know not how thy joy we ever should come near. Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet were, thou scorner of the ground. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. Such harmonious madness from my lips would flow, the world should listen then, as I am listening now. So we will go back to it in just a minute. Let's see. Let's see. I don't know where I went. Where did I go? Let's see. Okay, there I am. Oh goodness. Okay, yeah, this is interesting. Sharing these poetry screens. So before I talk about some of the things in this poem, I want to know, what do you think it's about? What did it mean to you? How did it make you feel? Let's get into our feelings and emotions like the true romantics we are today. So one of the things that stands out to me in this poem is that contrasting of humans versus nature. And we'll see that also in Ode to a Nightingale. This longing that Shelley feels in this poem. And we don't know exactly, who the speaker of this poem is, but in this poem and the next, I feel like we can, with pretty clear certainty, say that the speaker is the poet himself in both To a Skylark and Ode to a Nightingale, because both make references to being poets. And so Shelley talks about the skylark here and the way that the skylark soars above the skies. So I thought it would be interesting to, first of all, talk a little bit about skylarks in folklore and in Shakespeare, because the poets were greatly influenced by folklore and mythology and Shakespeare's work. So you will see those themes prominently in both this poem and the next, referring back to mythology. So let's see. Dina said, yes, the freedom in the natural world. And I said we would reference Taylor Swift a couple of times. Particularly now, I want to talk about her song The Lakes. I will talk about it again when we talk about Ode to a Nightingale in a minute. But in the song The Lakes, she makes clear reference to the Romantic poets. One of the first generation poets is William Wordsworth. And in The Lakes, Taylor Swift has a line that says, who, I'll just paraphrase, but who are these, cynical, fools on their cell phones? Who are they to tell me what are my words worth? But she also, this idea of her song, she sings in the chorus, take me to the lakes where all the poets went to die. So it is about escaping. So as I talked about before, the poets wanted to escape into the natural world to get away from industry, the Industrial Revolution, the pollution, the noise of the cities, and that conformity that was taking place. They were rebels and they wanted to get away from all of that. So that image, take me to the lakes, right? We see this here where Shelley talks about wanting to be away from, the cares of man, comparing himself, if I could be like a skylark and I could be without hate or pride, I could be without worry, I could care for my, fellow man. And back to the folklore of of skylarks. So there is a folklore that states that a skylark traded its eyes with the toad. Therefore, that's why a skylark's eyes are not attractive and a toad's are. And this is also referenced in Romeo and Juliet, which has nightingales in it too. But in a section of Romeo and Juliet, Juliet hears the song of the skylark. And while most of us would find it a welcome song For her, she calls it a loathed song because it means that day is breaking. So Romeo has to leave her space. So I just find it interesting to look at the different ways that skylarks are represented in folklore and in Shakespeare. And I have references to you if you're interested in knowing more about the skylark and folklore. But I did want to make mention of that because of the way that the poets were very, these romantic poets were quite familiar with mythology and with Shakespeare. So now we'll talk a little bit about some of the lines in the poem itself. Like I said, I don't really want to get like really bogged down in all the different poetic devices, but more so just to talk about some of the feelings, the themes, and the symbolism. So let me get to those notes here. And first of all, let's change over to the themes and symbolism now with our little banner. And I know I'm a little scattered today, but that is my day today. We won't go into all the reasons why I could be scattered today. Okay, so let's talk about elements with themes and symbolism. So I think we've really kind of established the theme already, and some of you in the comments about getting away to the natural world and appreciating the peace and the beauty that we find in nature. And in much the same way that these poets pushed back against the Industrial Revolution, I feel like that's very relevant to us today as we push back. Here we are. I know we're using social media, we're using the internet, but the invasion of social media into our lives, to get away into nature, to put the phone down, right? Now that's just as relevant to us as this idea of the romantic poets escaping from the city, getting away from factories and pollution. It's just in a different sort of context today, but it's the same idea that we have to get away from the chaos of life and to heal in nature, because nature is very healing. So that's going to be like an overarching theme for a lot of this. It is, and it is actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Even though it's titled To a Skylark, it is an ode. So we'll talk a little bit, about what an ode is. But it is, doesn't have ode in the title, but it is definitely an ode. Yes, because when we stop, when we get away from the noise, we find, just like you said, the small things in nature. I went outside last week and I was just looking at my plants and bushes and trees, and there was a caterpillar just making its way, up the bush and going on a leaf, and just watching that caterpillar. It is very healing, and sometimes it's hard for us to get away into that. I do live in a more rural area, so if I want to get out into nature, it's a little bit easier for me in some ways, but I still have to leave the phone alone and step away from duties, responsibilities a little bit sometimes. But if you live in a city, is even harder, right, for you to be able to find that. So I hope that you have ways of finding that, because it is very healing. So the skylark, we've talked about, really is this symbol of the morning, a symbol of daybreak. The bird too, I don't want to, it's going to be kind of hard to flip back and forth from the screen. So I probably won't put it back up again. But when he talks about the bird soaring as it sings, that is actually true of a skylark. They can soar and keep singing while they're soaring. And you notice too, in that line, he did a reflection or a mirror when he talked about I'm going to paraphrase probably, unless I can find it conveniently without taking up too much time in my physical print of the poem. Okay, yes, it's in the second stanza in the last line. Shelley writes about the skylark, and singing still dost soar, and soaring ever singest. So it's like that mirror, singing while it soars. And then you have what's called the caesura, which is a comma or a pause in the middle of a line. So you have soaring does sing, pause, singing does soar. So it's the way that a poet would emphasize that idea of the bird singing and soaring and singing. The speaker, of course, as the Romantics did, wants to learn from nature, wants to learn from the skylark how to experience happiness and spiritual fulfillment that is often lacking for us as humans. And he talks about, too, that he's searching around, right? He keeps talking about what can I compare to thee? He's looking around. He can't really find anything to compare the skylark to specifically. So we can also think about this skylark song as being a symbol of the purity of nature and the way that nature expresses itself perfectly without having to struggle, for words to say, which I feel like I'm often struggling for words to say. But nature, it's just putting forth, like the skylark is putting forth a song without really having to think about it. It's just a natural, inclination. Yes, they did. Thank you, Swain. Yeah, Shelley actually wrote this when he was walking out in nature and observing the skylark. So they did, they talked about escaping into nature, and that's what they did whenever they could. So we also have symbols of light and the sky. We see the speaker's first mention of the sky, referring to it as the heavens, which immediately then links the sky with a divine nature. Even though, as I mentioned, Shelley was an atheist, he did believe in spirituality and a connection to the universe. So he even too mentions the moon, and the moon, he calls it a silver sphere, and it rains out her beams. So we have a lot of water imagery in this poem. He talks about the flooding, of the. Okay, something just hit my window, and probably a bird, but I think it flew off. Okay, sorry. Skylark? I don't know what it was. But yes, so we have that idea of the natural world being personified, which we see quite a bit in the work of the Romantic poets too, where human-like qualities are given to animals or, plants, those kind of things. There was something else before the bird hit the window that I was going to say, but maybe I'll remember it in a minute. Oh, yes. So this poem was actually influenced by one of the first generation poets, William Wordsworth. He had a poem about a skylark that had a lot of water imagery and ideas of flooding in it. So Shelley drew some inspiration from William Wordsworth's Skylark poem. So let me see if there was something else before I forget. So like I said, I don't want to talk about all of the poetic devices in these poems because I don't want this to be like a poetry class. I want it to be more of our discussion. So we have a lot of metaphor in this poem too, which is a direct comparison. Shelley writes that the light that the sun gives off, he calls it golden lightning, but then he calls the moonlight arrows of the silver sphere. So that would be an example of a metaphor. It's not just light coming from the moon. He says arrows from the silver sphere. similes we also have in the poem too. So a simile is a comparison that uses the word like or as. So we also see some of that in the poem too. So let's see. We talked about the idea of personification, giving those human-like qualities to something that is not human. Repetition, we do have different types of repetition in the poem. So for time's sake, and because we have another poem, we won't talk about all of them. But when you see repetition in a poem, it is often because the poet really wants to emphasize whatever he or she or they may be repeating. It's just a technique they use to call attention to the reader to say, hey, I really want you to focus on this. Let's see. Rhetorical questions. Notice that he does speak to the Skylark and ask questions. What can I compare thee to? How can I do this? So these are obviously not going to get answers from the Skylark. He's not going to hear an answer. This also makes this an example of what's called apostrophe, where a poet or writer is speaking to something or to someone that cannot answer them back. So we know that the Skylark can't answer him back, but it was, it's a lot more beautiful to act as if it can and to use these techniques of personification and apostrophe to bring, this poem to life as he does. So let's see what else I might want to say before we move to Ode to a Nightingale. Let's see. I think that's about it, unless anybody has other questions. Like I said, I could spend hours and hours talking about these poems, but we don't have that kind of time. Yes, like exactly like Poe and the Raven, the way that Poe, speaks to the Raven, and of course, quote the Raven, nevermore, right? I'm actually wearing a Poe Raven shirt right now. So now we'll switch over and talk about this bird of the night, the nightingale. So also in the same way I did with the Skylark, I want to talk a little bit about the nightingale in folklore, mythology, and in Shakespeare. So Shakespeare would often pair the Skylark and the nightingale in his work as morning and evening counterparts. So the lark, of course, heralds the dawn, and the nightingale symbolizes evening. The lark and the nightingale can often be thought of as sisters, or kind of like opposites in a way, or mirrors of each other. They share a similar association with music, and they represent the times of day. Both birds, interestingly enough, are said in folklore to have switched, eyes with other creatures. As I mentioned, the Skylark, supposedly, according to folklore, switched eyes with a toad. And the nightingale is said to have switched eyes with a serpent. And that is why the nightingale has to stay awake all night on the watch for the serpent to come back and get revenge. So the nightingale, just like the Skylark, does appear in Romeo and Juliet. Again, the song of a skylark breaks out, and Juliet does not want Romeo to leave. So she says, "Oh no, that's not the Skylark. That's the nightingale. It's still evening. You can stay here." And Romeo says, "No, I can't. That's not the sky. That's not the nightingale. It's the Skylark, and I have to go." Another reference to a skylark is in one of the most disturbing Greek, and it also has a Roman adaptation to mythological story of Procne and Philomela. So depending on whether you read the Greek version or the Roman version, the birds that the sisters get into are interchanged. But in either version, one of the sisters, because she wants to talk about the other sister's husband, how he tricked her and told her sister died so that he could then marry her. And she finds out the truth and she threatens to tell everyone what he did. So he cuts out her tongue so she cannot speak. However, she weaves a tapestry that tells the story of what he did, and he gets found out. And to get revenge on him, his wife kills their child and serves it up to him. Lovely Greek and Roman myths, right? But eventually, the sisters are turned into birds. So depending on which version you read, sometimes it is the sister who was first married to the man who's turned into the nightingale because she's forever mourning at night for what she did to her child. Other versions say that it was this other sister whose tongue was removed who was turned into the nightingale. So that way she can call out in the night for the rest of time about what happened to her. But either way, you have, again, that image of the nightingale being awake at night and calling out either in mourning or in, kind of giving that signal, wanting everybody to know what happened. So that's just a little bit about nightingales. And you can find, I will link references for this too. There have been books written about birds and other creatures in mythology, and also a book written about birds and other creatures specifically in Shakespeare. And if you're interested in the Romantic poets, it'd probably be beneficial also if you read these books, if that's something you want to do. So now we will move on. We've talked about John Keats when we talked about the author bios at the beginning. So I will go ahead now and pull up Ode to a Nightingale, which is a little bit shorter than To a Skylark. To a Skylark is a little bit lengthy. So we will go to Ode to a Nightingale, and I will come back and ramble on about that. Ode to a Nightingale by John Keats. My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed, and lethe words had sunk. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but by being too happy in thine happiness, that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beechen green and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. Oh, for a drought of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance and provincial song and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. Fade far away, dissolve, and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known. The weariness, the fever, and the fret here, where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last gray hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wings of poesy, though the dull brain perplexes and retards. Already with thee, tender is the night, and haply the queen moon is on her throne, clustered round by all her starry fays. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs. But in embalmed darkness, guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn, and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sigh. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when, sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn. The same that oft times hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas, in fairy lands forlorn. Forlorn, the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my soul's self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? So let's talk about Ode to a Nightingale. Yes, he does. Because he is talking about there's feels like no escape, right? He's got no way out of the plight of human nature, the horrors that we see. He saw horrors, we still see horrors, right? And he feels like that would be his way out. Yes, definitely with his melancholy. And like we talked about, he does have a poem, Ode on Melancholy. So, as I mentioned, the poets were very much in touch with their emotions, and melancholia being one of those emotions. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the allusions or references that he makes. So one of the things he says, so I got a gnat around here. In the first stanza, he talks about a dryad of the trees. So dryads are nymphs, tree nymphs specifically. So that is like a form of repetition, because he did not have to, write dryad of the trees, because that's like, a dryad being already a spirit of a nymph of a tree. He's just emphasizing that. He also talks about, I was about to talk about his drinking, right? Mentions drinking hemlock, right? So poison, he talks about that, or, talks about using opium, right? He says, emptied some dull opiate to the drains. And then he says, and Lethe words had sunk. So the river of Lethe in Greek mythology is the river that, deceased souls would swim in order to forget. So when he talks about, drinking the hemlock, or, taking opium, he's talking about forgetting his pain, his struggles and sorrows, washing himself away like he's washing in the river of Lethe. So again, that importance of noting their connections to mythology. Then in that second stanza, he talks about the blushful hypocrite when he talks about he wants a draught of wine, right? He wants full of the warm south. So uppercase south, he's talking about a type of wine. And he's full of the true, the blushful hypocrite. So in Greek mythology, Hippocrene was a spring on Mount Helicon that was believed to have been made when the winged horse Pegasus stomped his foot in the ground. It created that spring, which has sacred water. It is sacred to the muses. Therefore, if you partake of that particular water, you can be gifted with the gift of poetry. So he's talking about, again, himself as a poet. And then I want to talk about alliteration. We didn't talk about it in the other poem because I didn't want to get too bogged down in that particular poetic device. But alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginnings of words close together. So I wish I could conveniently put it back up on the screen. I probably can. Let me see if I can do that without too much trouble while we talk about this alliteration. Let me see. Okay. I feel like it's important to do this for alliteration. So he's talking about taking this drink with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouth. So you have not only alliteration where you have that same, that B sound, beaded bubbles, brim. You also have consonants, which is a repetition of consonant sounds in words close together, but not just the sound being at the beginning. So you also have a B sound here in the middle, bubbles. And then you have alliteration with winking. So you put that all together, it's like you're almost envisioning the beating bubbles. They're, the winking at the brim and your mouth, being stained in purple with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouth. This is also a great example of imagery. So imagery is when a poet or writer uses words that evoke our senses. So it's not just, words that help us see things, which we would typically think of when we hear the word image. It also is for for the very best of writers, not only do they help us see things, they help us feel things like we're touching something, hear things. So here, beaded bubbles, we can kind of hear, this would be like a sparkling type of wine or a champagne, something that's going to be bubbling. So they're beating, you can kind of hear that bubbling up. Winking, you get the image, they go to the top, they kind of wink out. And purple stained mouth. So you get the feeling of having drunk enough that your mouth is purple stained. So I wanted to highlight that particularly because of its use of alliteration and consonants, but also to imagery. And then something else, let me highlight it again. You have assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sounds in words close together with winking brim. So he is doing so much in just those two lines that I would be remiss if I hadn't particularly highlighted that. I had to show that. Okay. So I want to talk also where he talks in the further stanzas down. He talks about away, away, I will fly to thee. So now after having heard again, Taylor Swift, her song, The Lakes, take me to the lakes, when I hear away, away, I think of take me to the lakes, right? I just want to escape I want to get away from all of this noise. I want to go to where I can be alone. And that's what Keats is talking about here. Away, away, I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wings of Posy. So when he gets to this stanza, he's saying, I want to go away. I don't want to go away because I'm drunk, right? When he makes reference to Bacchus, so Bacchus is the Roman god of wine and revelry. So he says, I want to go away, but not because I'm drunk, but instead on the viewless wings of Posy. So Posy is poetry, imagination. He says, I want to go away because I want to be immersed in nature. I want nature to be enough to take me away. I want to be drunk on nature. I don't want to be drunk on wine. Yes, definitely emo, very emotional, very melancholic, which is why this one, like I said, to a Skylark is maybe a little bit more, I prefer to this one. But if I'm being honest about the way I typically feel, this one is much more personally relatable to. I am a person who does deal with melancholia. To use the term it used to be called, now they call it major depressive disorder, but there's something very romantic. The thing itself is obviously not romantic, and I would never want to romanticize it. But the word melancholia definitely is a more romantic way to say it. So now I want to talk a little bit about the theme. So here we get this idea of death and time and impermanence. In that, we also have an example of hyperbole, which is an exaggeration, extreme exaggeration, because when we get toward the end of the poem, Keats talks about how the bird is immortal and how he will pass and other humans will pass, but the bird lives on. So obviously this very particular nightingale is not immortal, but it's the idea of nature being immortal and nature continuing even after we die. And it's also, in addition to being an ode, it's also considered to be an elegy. So an elegy is a poem that expresses grief, sorrow, or lamenting the loss or death of someone. So it is in that sense an elegy for the things maybe that haven't yet died. The speaker's ability to enjoy the world and to enjoy nature is dampened by the belief that nothing will be around forever. So he's giving a eulogy for himself and all the others that will not live forever. Again, now I'm going to make a brief reference to The Lakes by Taylor Swift. She sings at the beginning of that song, "Is it romantic how all my elegies eulogize me?" So she's very much in tune with this idea of the romantics and the melancholia and the grieving of oneself, or the grieving of things that have been lost or are being lost in that very moment or will be lost in the future. So we can kind of get that circular idea about, is time really linear? We won't try to have that conversation today. Yeah, I always have trouble saying that word, dysthymia. Yeah, dysthymia. Yes, that word. So let me see. Let me check our time here. We're doing pretty good. It's about 3. Again, we see this being another example of an apostrophe where Keats is making a plea or asking questions of this nightingale, which clearly is unable to answer him back. So that's a technique that's used to make this feel more real, to help us ask these questions of the nightingale or ask these questions of the universe, or these questions for ourselves. He certainly also uses the technique of personification. Even when he talks about the dryads, that was a way that in Greek mythology, trees were personified. This belief that these nymphs dwelled in the trees. We also have other allusions, flora, which of course we know the words flora and fauna, right? But flora is actually the Roman goddess of plants and flowers. So that's why we talk about, plants and flowers as flora. So more of that wonderful, wonderful mythology interspersed in this poem. Let's see if there was anything else in particular that I wanted to talk about. I think that's all the specific things. Like I said, I could ramble on a long time about the romantic poet. Does anybody have any other thoughts or questions or anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't? Anything you noticed in the poems that we didn't discuss? All right, so I'll kind of do a few closing things, but don't feel like you can't pop something up in the chat if you have a comment you want to make or a question you want to ask. So the next selection for our Literary Love Book Club, our May read, and you could call it also May and June because we do not have, our book club. I don't have a book for every month. It's every other month. So when I say the book club pick for May, we'll have our live show in June. And that is going to be a heavy read. So you may want to embrace some of your joy and your light while you can. Because in May, we're going to be reading Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. So just wanted to give you a heads up for that. Let's see. Yep, same here. Same here. A lot of the romantic poets write about that and deal with that. Samuel Taylor Coleridge is also another poet who speaks to me in that way, definitely. And I find so much peace in the romantics. I often find myself running back to them time and time again in times of grief and stress. And really these past many, many, many years that we've been experiencing, the romantics have brought me a great level of comfort, for sure. For sure. Yep. Yes. Crystal, she was talking about, she may still be doing it, but Crystal mentioned a while back that she was reading a poem every day when she had her coffee. And I love that. I talked a little bit on our virtual tea party earlier today about a book called A Nature Poem for Every Day of the Year, which I have. So you could read that one in the morning. There's also a nature poem for every night of the year. I don't have that one, but I want to get that. That way you could read your specific date, that poem for the day in the morning, and then the specific date at night to kind of round out your day. Yes, I love that. And I think a lot of people don't like poetry because I think I talk about this here too, the way they were taught in school. Teachers would often go in starting with form and meter and that kind of stuff, which is not that exciting, for kids or for adults for that matter. While that can teach us about the poem, and yes, nice to know that stuff. Like you said, Crystal, I think just reading it and thinking about it and responding to it is so much more gratifying and helps us appreciate it and not be intimidated by it. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much. I know that's kind of the sad part of it, right? That we may not have all of this had they had certain kinds of therapy. That's what I love to hear because that's I want I want people to have the joy of poetry and to not let not let anybody uh, stuff shirt academic or otherwise keep you from enjoying poetry because it's meant to be felt and expressed. And I also encourage you to read it out loud. Just, poems are really meant to be read out loud. I mean, if you don't want to read it out loud, then you don't have to, but you can really pick up on a lot of the form and the meter and the meaning if you read it out loud. So once again, everybody, thank you. I appreciate all of you for being here today, taking time out of your day to spend some time together. It means a lot to me for you to be here. And if anyone is catching it on the replay, I want to thank you so much for catching the replay. And there are so many resources available online for poetry. Poetry Foundation is a very good resource. It has a lot of poems. And then if you're so interested, it also has the bios and different articles too. Like if you wanted to learn more about the Romantic era, you could find information there. So just find some poetry that works for you, whether it be classic or whether it be the Romantics or whether it be a poet writing today. Enjoy it. And thank you again for watching. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope that I'll be able to see you on Tuesday. Morning for me starts at 9 Central. Tuesday, we will be having self-care sprints on my channel again. So read a poem, take care of yourself, and I will see you Tuesday. Bye.